In the mid-1970s, there was nothing about the rock and roll lifestyle that was relatable or obtainable for fans of the genre. The simple chord play and familiar song structure that dominated primitive rock was a huge thing of the past. By the genre's third decade, intricate and complicated instrumental play had fully taken a death grip on rock and roll. Jimmy Page, Ritchie Blackmore, and many, many others were expanding on what Jimi Hendrix and Eric Clapton had started the decade before, revolutionizing what it meant to play guitar in a rock band. Solos were becoming a modern-day art form, a field to express yourself with beautiful, violent, or sensual play, and oftentimes a combination of all three elements at once. The guitar solos of the era may as well have been called peacocking, as they certainly stood out amongst the flock and had no problem alluring mates. Meanwhile, the vocalists were getting even more outlandish, drilling impossible notes while staying in the orbit of the proper key. Robert Plant, Roger Daltrey, and Ozzy Osbourne were pushing towards a more elaborate role within a band. Not only were the voices primed to grab the audience by their collective throat, they were also involved with performing and being a part of the energy inside the stadium. That was important in the 60s, a la Jim Morrison, but the concept of the singer owning the stage with his mates flanked out was only becoming more crucial. The process of becoming a professional musician had always been daunting, but with the massive concept of stage presence and rock stardom really starting to take shape, the genre was starting to dig a massive moat between those on stage and those huddled around it. Seeing Led Zeppelin at Madison Square Garden would not inspire many attendees to go grab some instruments, carve out time in a garage, and go jam with your pals. Those guys may as well have been performing on Mount Olympus. We had officially entered the rock and roll fantasy camp era. I mean, seriously. Can you imagine hearing Lynyrd Skynyrd's solo on Free Bird after a few beers and thinking, yeah, I can definitely do that someday? Rock and roll had become something to gawk at, not actively participate in. But an alternative form of the genre was starting to rumble about the time the Watergate scandal was gaining some serious momentum. In 1974, New York City had seen better days. The region was full of dilapidated buildings and sketchy characters. The era of the Rat Pack and Mickey Mantle running around the bright lights in Big City were gone. It was now Travis Bickle's Big Apple. And with the angst and frustration of New York literally and figuratively falling apart, a rockin' revolution was taking place. Deep into the borough of Queens was the neighborhood of Forest Hills. And that is where a gang consisting of 4 guys donning leather jackets, tattered sneakers, and worn-out jeans formed to forever change what rock music could look and sound like. The groundbreaking quartet went as the Ramones, which came from Paul McCartney's traveling alias, Paul Ramon. Despite none of the band members being Spanish or actually related, the moniker was fitting. All it took was one trip to the legendary CBGB Music Club in the East Village of Manhattan to notice the obvious. The Ramones did not look or sound like anyone in the history of rock. Jeffrey Hyman, who the world remembers as Joey Ramone, became the band's voice and soul. His long, dangling 6'6" frame leaned over the stage while curling up with the microphone stand. His one-of-a-kind inflection offered unique pronunciation and emphasis during the band's songs. Joey even cut certain syllables out in his lyrics, which often led to brand new words and sounds altogether. His sunglasses and thick black hair often covered his eyes, and despite anxiety and shyness seeping through his bloodstream, his heartfelt and exciting delivery connected him with countless people far better than a pearly white smile ever could. John Cummings, who became Johnny Ramone, emerged as the lead guitar pounder and general of the Ramones' operation. His frantic, downstroking style became the standard for all aggressive rock guitarists going forward. What he lacked in technical proficiency or in impressive solos, Johnny made up for it 10 times over with some of the most fervent and dogged play in rock and roll history. His relentless wrist would keep the Ramones plucking along for over 2 decades. Moreover, he was the one in charge of cultivating the band's image, both musically and stylistically. Johnny, at times forcefully, kept the group together. Douglas Colvin was the first member to officially change his name, as the energetic bassist became Dee Dee Ramone in 1974. He emerged as a prominent lyricist for the band, being credited with penning some of the Ramones' most famous songs. His impassioned cries of 1, 2, 3, 4 as a count-in became an iconic aspect of the band's story and developed into the lexicon as a rock and roll rallying cry. His fast-paced thumps acted as the spine for the primitive punk rockers. Not to mention, his hair-on-fire lifestyle offered up plenty of material for the Ramones to explore, both musically and lyrically. Dee Dee was the vibrant color in the Ramones' mostly muted world. Rounding out this fervent foursome was Thomas Erdehey, who lives on in history as Tommy Ramone. His job was simple to define, yet difficult to execute. Create a wicked fast drumming style that could mesh perfectly with the other 3 Ramones' unique musical qualities. Tommy's quick-wristed play not only perfectly complemented Joey, Johnny, and Dee Dee, with no unnecessary fills and a slick ability to stay with the breakneck tempo, but his pace behind the kit would become a sought-after approach for a plethora of future rock bands. Metal drummers, like John Bonham of Led Zeppelin, use their shoulders to drive their performance. For Tommy and future punks everywhere, the emphasis was all on the wrists. The Ramones' influence bounced all around the music glossary. Some of their smoother, love-centric songs with the ooh backing harmonies were ringers for Beach Boys tunes. Yet, their more enduring calling card was being descendants of pioneering punk acts like the New York Dolls, the MC5, and Iggy Pop and the Stooges. The Ramones had some top 40 sensibilities, mostly stemming from Joey. They often created a harsh, thrashing sound, courtesy of Johnny. The band represented the attitude of outcasts. A lot of that came from Dee Dee. And their fast-paced temperament was driven in large part from Tommy. The Ramones are the ultimate music example of the whole being greater than the sum of the parts. If the guys never linked up in 1974, could they have gone on to have individual careers as musicians? Sure. But it is doubtful that any of them would have created a more impressive legacy than what they left behind as a foursome. They were a unit. While not literally brothers, they may as well have shared blood. Between arguing on stage, griping on what musical direction they should or should not experiment with, wearing the same clothes, putting aside individual goals for the betterment of the group, they were practically a family. Particularly, their infighting would become legendary, as decades together would unfortunately take their toll on its members. But before the Ramones became jaded, frustrated, and burnt out later on in their career, the band was making the jump to the studio with hopes of becoming the next big rock band. After seeing them perform at CBGB and being a staple at the establishment for 2 years, the Ramones were primed for a professional album, and Seymour Stein of Sire Records would ink the guys to a contract. On April 23rd, 1976, the Ramones' debut was released to the masses. Their album cover was eye-popping. Roberta Bailey perfectly captured the band's essence by snapping a black and white photo of the 4 guys leaning against a brick wall in their iconic punk rock garb of worn-out jeans, beat-up sneakers, and, of course, leather jackets. Inside the album sleeve contained the Ramones' first entry into the public world. 14 tracks that combined did not quite crack the half-hour threshold. But the foursome accomplished more in 29 minutes than some bands achieve in 29 years. Hello, I am Chad Jones, and welcome to Don't Scratch the Vinyl, a music podcast where myself and occasionally a guest break down an iconic album in its entirety. This show both lays out the historical significance of the record and what music fans can take from the compilation today. I am recording this episode at Big Night Media's studio in Boston, Massachusetts. Full episodes of Don't Scratch the Vinyl can be found on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Please follow the show along on social media for more music-related content. Thank you for engaging with the show. I am sure it is hard for anyone of a certain age threshold to pinpoint the exact first time they were exposed to the Ramones or learned who they were, as almost every sporting event capable of supporting a sound system will hit the crowd with the wail of, "Hey, ho, let's go." As a young boy growing up in Southern California in the 2000s, the Ramones' music would occasionally be slipped into my media. Blitzkrieg Bop got played in the Jimmy Neutron movie. Tony Hawk Underground 2's soundtrack included Rock and Roll High School. But a real eye-opening exploration into rock music occurred when one of my older brothers, Tyler, wanted the entire family to watch this movie titled School of Rock. Not only did the 2003 Jack Black classic introduce me to names and bands I would not fully appreciate until years later, such as Kurt Cobain and Motorhead, one portion of the film was carved into the hippocampus region of my brain immediately. After Jack Black is told by the guitar player, Zach, his teaching lesson really resonated with him, you see multiple faculty members nodding along in approval. As Black looks off in the cafeteria, the Ramones' Bonzo Goes to Bitburg starts rolling in from the station. The avalanche of touching punk fills the screen, leading the way for Joey Ramone's raspy cry that commands you got to pick up the pieces, to kick off one of the most effective and charming montages in movie history. Black has created a rock history diagram on the chalkboard with spiderweb connections for different eras and subgenres. He then shows every musician in his newly formed band not how to play the instruments, as the preppy kids for the most part are all classically trained. He teaches them how to be rock stars and what ultimately that means for each of them. He shows Freddie the drummer eye-catching stick techniques, gives the three backup dancers advice on their own choreography, depicts an intimidating face for Katie to wear as the bassist, shows Zach Pete Townshend's iconic windmill technique, Jimi Hendrix's backward somersault, and Angus Young's what can only be described as an onstage seizure. He helps Lawrence add a leg kick and finger gun to his repertoire as a keyboardist, and dims the lights to break out a slideshow, which can only be the history of punk, as he shows the kids Iggy Pop, the Ramones, the Clash, and Nirvana, in that order. What is really special about this portion are the bits that don't show Black, but the kids by themselves embracing what the rock and roll genre had to offer. The backup dancers all working on their routine together, Gordon creating a sick, clever logo for the band, Billy designing the guys' potential onstage outfits as well as the girls, Summer, played by the amazing Miranda Cosgrove, reading The Business of Music, Zach rocking out with his acoustic guitar in the closet as if he is performing at the LA Forum, and probably the most effective part of the sequence is Freddie, enamored with iconic drumming footage, including the rambunctious Keith Moon, while alone in the classroom. No pencils or paper are shown when the camera pans to the young drummer sitting at his desk, as he is taking notes with his eyes. If I was not already on a path to become more infatuated with rock music's history, the Ramones-led montage really pushed me down that road. I was blown away by the vocals, vivacious play, and enthralling energy. It took me a bit to learn that the movie cleverly included the Ramones on screen as the song played. Being just young enough to remember childhood without YouTube, I recall really locking in for this part of the movie whenever the DVD was popped in. I always loved watching the film, but this portion touched me in a way few scenes ever have. What I did not realize at the time was that Richard Linklater had formally introduced me to one of my favorite all-time bands. And as I grew up and became even more informed about punk rock and its history, I only became more invested in the Ramones' story, not just as a band, but as individuals. They also got a mention in one of my all-time favorite historical documents, VH1's 100 Greatest Hard Rock Songs program. Blitzkrieg Bop landed 25 on that list. And to this day, I get emotional and even partially teary-eyed hearing Rachel Perry's closing narration comments about the guys. While now it would be updated, with all 4 of the original Ramones being gone, this was put out in late 2008. 3 of the 4 original Ramones have passed away, Dee Dee of a heroin overdose and Johnny and Joey of cancer. Today, you can see tributes to the guys all over, but the band's greatest legacy remains their music. No lie, I got a bit wet around my eyes first typing that into this podcast document. Throughout my life, the more time I spent with their songs and learned about the band's inner workings, the more invested I became in their overall story. The Ramones' journey of touring all over the world as true trailblazers in an industry that never gave them the credit they deserved while they were still active bandmates. They helped inspire countless groups to pursue music, as much as anyone in music history. They were unabashedly themselves. I find the Ramones' band dynamics endlessly fascinating. And I'm still bothered by the fact that Joey did not live to see 50, Johnny and Dee Dee did not live to see 60, and Tommy did not live to see 70. They were more revered in retirement, and certainly still are in death, than they were during their actual run. But as Rachel Perry beautifully put in that tribute during the VH1 program, their greatest legacy is absolutely their music. The Ramones' fervent energy always hooks me deeper into their trance. Their catchy hooks, unique vocals, and sped-up instrumental play make them a truly special band in my eyes. Through live recordings and studio albums, they helped form one of the great subgenres in music history. And pouring through their impressive record discography entirely for the first time in preparation for this episode, it was a scintillating venture. It was fascinating seeing the different stages of their career. But the Ramones' 1976 debut album stands out as being a breathing document for the band's initial, idealized vision. It is hard to imagine a more effective jumpstart to their iconic run. The Ramones' debut album starts off with Blitzkrieg Bop. It is one of the best songs off a debut album, and not only rock history, but find me any musician who has come up with a more lightning start to their career. Hey, ho, let's go became the Ramones' battle cry. The industrial vibe pounds from the get-go, as they were clearly a working-class band raised on energy. The guitar, bass, and drums mesh to birth what we now know as punk rock music. Joey's unique yelp then struts in with a passionate delivery. While some of the lyrics are hard to decipher, especially on the first listen, the tone and quality is enough to hook the listener in right away. So some backstory to where the title came from. Blitzkrieg Bop is a clever play on words from the military term blitzkrieg, which translates to lightning war. And the tactic famously used by Nazi Germany in World War II describes a swift attack towards an enemy using mobile forces, such as tanks or planes. Tommy and Dee Dee penned the song, and both had connections to Germany. I'll touch on that a little bit more later on. That point leads to an interesting deeper dive for those fascinated with lyrics. But despite the obvious war undertones of this track, it also does an incredible job of showing what youthful living is all about. What they want, Joey says, I don't know. They're all revved up and ready to go. That is a great description for hormonal teenagers. When they concoct all this adrenaline and anxiety for unknown reasons, but they just don't know where to put it. In 2.5 minutes, This track does an incredible job of explaining what the Ramones were all about. And the song will live on forever to pump up lull times in sporting events, as itchy trigger-fingered DJs will happily pull out Joey Ramone's passionate cries whenever appropriate. It is a song that will truly never die. And it's one of the most effective kickstarters to any musician in the history of recorded music. Just incredible that they put this song lead off for their first album. Next up, Beat on the Brat. So Joey's voice really drives this Ramones classic. His breathy, exacerbated cries are perfect for one of the first punk anthems. The ridiculousness is intertwined superbly with the earnestness of his command. This shows off the band's rugged, rough exterior that they often show during their songs. The timing from Johnny, Dee Dee, and Tommy musically is so pristine. And the instruments produce something of a steel wool quality to it, very similar to early Black Sabbath's music. The instruments are vibrating right in sync with Joey's voice. And the song sets up a classic Ramones element. Multiple, in fact. Repetitive lyrics, an outlandish story, and music played with absolutely no fluff. I can only imagine hearing this time in 1976 after putting on the Ramones' debut album and hearing Blitzkrieg Bop and then Beat on the Brat. I can only imagine the shock to nervous systems all across the land. So I'm not 100% certain, but I'm pretty confident I was first introduced to this track courtesy of Billy Madison, the classic Adam Sandler comedy, as this song gets played when our lovable but doofus of a protagonist pelts kids with dodgeballs during a recess scene. It's very fitting that that's the form of media this Ramones song is connected to. Next up is titled Judy is a Punk. You get a really vibrant intro to get this track underway. The energy is just insatiable from the guys. An incredible kickstart. I love the characters that they include for this song, Jackie and Judy. And throughout their time as a band, the Ramones consistently wrote terrific songs about memorable people, be they real or not. Sheena being a punk rocker, Ramona being sweet, the aforementioned Bonzo going to Bitburg. It was a key component of their songwriting. And these characters in particular have a certain lore about them, as that they would actually come back in another Ramones record in 1980, as they get a shout out in a song on End of the Century. So Joey is really spitting out the words on this effort. And the creativity here is noticeable not only in the lyrics, but how he delivers them. Second verse, same as the first, he says. Then coming back a little bit later with third verse, different from the first. An incredible sequence. Very creative how he takes the listener almost behind the curtain as the fourth wall drop in for the song. It's one of the most endearing sections on this album. And Joey's voice also really jumps on the "perhaps she'll die, oh yeah" set of lyrics. Johnny is just hammering down his guitar. The breakneck tempo that would eventually play a massive role in his legacy is really highlighted on this number. Whereas some parts of the album, he plays a little bit more thick, not quite as sped up as future Ramones records would be. But he is really gunning for it on this number with his quick-wristed draw. One of the most potent and effective songs on this album. Now we're off to slow down the pace with I Want to Be Your Boyfriend. So next up, much more relaxed, a quite lovely tune. And the pace is so much more relaxed and slow. But the track is still very to the point, as a beeline directness was a massive component of the Ramones songs and lyrics. Subtlety was not a key part of the band's framework. They were trying to get their message across bluntly, using their instruments and Joey's voice. This track is just so intimate, and it allows Joey to show off a really important aspect of his persona that was true to him as a musician and as a person. Romance was very, very important to him. And that virtue would come through in countless Ramones tunes. He just seems so sincere in his delivery on this song. Like he did not want to come off as fake. He didn't need to put on a facade for this number. He is really in that headspace. He truly sounds like he wants to be this woman's boyfriend. And Joey's interest in love songs was a huge drive of the Ramones' sound and feel as a group. And it's interesting, is while other classic punk bands often shied away from revealing such vulnerability, especially as often as the Ramones did, a plethora of their songs show a light side to the group. And that dynamic was a massive reason why the Ramones are still adored to this day. And for the first time on their first album, Joey gets to indulge in that playground. Now, talking about a jarring change of pace. Next up is Chainsaw, and literally the tool is heard slicing through the speakers to start off this number. On this track, Joey gets to really play with the charismatic aspect of his delivery. And I love how he pronounces, for example, massacre phonetically as he sings Texas Chainsaw Massacre, how it's actually spelled. It really fits the off-kilter vibe coursing through this effort. So unique vocals and pronunciation are a heavy staple in Ramones songs and would be throughout their entire time together. That's also seen during the added pizzazz to the "oh yeah." It really jumps out on each listen on that portion towards the end of the song. You can tell the guys were having great fun filming this number. The play is not overly sped up, but the instruments do certainly convey a harsh sounding cut, not dissimilar to a chainsaw. A love song dealing with sadness and violence. Classic for these guys. Another key element that's mentioned here are the horror movie connections that the Ramones are never going to shake. From the spooky figured outline on Pleasant Dreams' album cover, to naming their amazing 1970 live album, It's Alive, after the 1974 horror film of the same name, it makes sense that they share a connection with Leatherface forever. A little bit more on the horror angle later on. Now we're off to Now I Want to Sniff Some Glue. What a dynamic announcement to start a rock song. Certainly every 12-year-old's favorite song on this record. And this track touches on Dee Dee's drug use, as famously that would cause great tension inside the band, especially with Johnny, as he tried so hard to keep the guys clean and keep their motors moving. He really did run the Ramones like a military outfit. The only difference was they swapped out camo shirts for leather jackets. But this song also shines light on the outcast angle that the Ramones half begrudgingly, half proudly accepted as a distinction for them. They tapped into counterculture, but not through hippie ideals. More as being the standoffish, awkward guys that some would call freaks or rejects. Dee Dee and Joey would really help bring out that element so effectively in their music. And songs like this were a massive reason why so many people could identify them, not just as important musicians to their time, but almost like friends. They were very real. They were relatable and attainable rockers in an era that was anything but. I love the musical breakup throughout the song, as the guys play around with pace so effectively on this album, but especially on this number. The backup sequence with Tommy tapping the hi-hats and then Joey and Dee Dee singing in harmony, nearly as a cappella together towards the end, is such a phenomenal sequence on this album. It's one of the best on the record. Grab a flashlight, because I don't want to go down to the basement. That's the next one. And here you get a chance to hear some of the Ramones' humor, as well as, again, their interest in the horror genre. As the line, I don't want to go down to the basement, stemmed from the guys poking fun at the horror movie trope of victims in the films going down there. Whereas, in real life, a basement is the last place you'd want to go if a killer was after you. So Joey's pronunciation shines through with his unique twist. When it sounds like he's singing the title, it really comes off like he's singing bass and not basement, almost like he's taken out some of the sides of the lyrics. And that would be a common aspect of his vocals, as lines that sound like he's not quite singing the full word can easily be spotted throughout the Ramones' discography. Also, he was huge on adding different emphasis and vowels towards certain songs, such as how he adds some breathy emphasis to the end of Romeo. So in this record, a lot of their music is a little bit more stripped down. So there is space for the listeners to really decipher what all three instruments are contributing on each song. So on upcoming Ramones albums, it would be a little bit more of a potent collective wall of noise the guys would produce. And Dee Dee's bass, for example, would not be as easy to pick out a lot of the time. But on this record, and especially this track, his plucks are crystal clear. It helps that the music is not as upbeat as other tunes on here, but still, that ominous, slightly unsettling feel resonates from this one. That plays so well with the song's subject matter. Next up, rockin' to Loudmouth. With the intro here, you can really pick up the theme of repetition in the Ramones' play. On the first listen of this album, especially if you were not aware of the band's formula, a lot of these songs are practically indistinguishable from one another. And that element really pops up at this specific point of the record. But that is where also, for the more seasoned listeners of the Ramones, you can kind of pick out the subtle differences in each song that makes them all unique. But also, at the end of the day, you just got to recognize repetitive nature is either a charming or annoying aspect of their sound, and whatever you feel it is. It's certainly not going away. But this song pushes that idea even further for those into that, as the full lyrics are literally, well, you're a loudmouth, baby. You better shut it up. I'm going to beat you up. That's it. That's literally the entire song's lyrics. The only difference is Joey would sometimes exchange baby for babe. That was the only change. The instrumental play on this one definitely hits the vibe of the song. No nonsense and direct, with just a touch of intimidation. And Joey's passionate vocals round out the quintessential early Ramones song. Ultimately, I feel this track's legacy is being a good litmus test for if you would truly appreciate the Ramones' unique style. If you hear Loudmouth and want to hear more, the Ramones are definitely for you. If you hear this song and you're annoyed and irritated, I don't think you're going to be a big fan of their songs. Next up, it's titled Havana Affair, taking a trip to Cuba. Another quick, tight opening from the three instruments gets this track going, and then Joey slides in with his oh-so-compelling voice. This is probably the most creative narrative on the album, as the lyrics go, PT boat on the way to Havana, I used to make a living, man, picking the banana. The Ramones lyrics often do such an effective job at dropping you right into a story with no context, but as the song develops, the lyrics and music really radiate to make it a surreal experience. And the Ramones' narratives could vary effectively with using I-driven songs, you points of view, and also, as we mentioned, specific characters. But at the heart of their storytelling, their passion and energy generally shines through. And sometimes even intertwining those perspectives make for some of their best work. So with the emphasis on certain vowels and syllables from Joey, you can really, really appreciate the vocal delivery on this track. How he breaks up Havana into almost 3 different sections right before the chorus is a really, really excellent part of his singing style. It really helps make the pronunciation just that much more endearing as a listener. Joey Ramone was truly a master at finding unique packages to wrap the Ramones' lyrics in. Off to Listen to My Heart. Now, a well-known detail about the Ramones was how they would often begin live shows, with Dee Dee passionately shouting out 1, 2, 3, 4 to set the tone on almost each song they performed. It was a staple of the band's concerts and highlighted their frenetic energy. Also, they did not waste time in between songs. Early on, they would sometimes argue about which track they were going to play next. There's even some footage of that online, and it's really, really funny. But they were not interested in delivering long soliloquies for the audience. That was not why they were there. All of which was a part of the Ramones, though living in a world of authenticity. Warts and all, you were going to get their full experience. But, bickering aside, Dee Dee's count-in made the official match to ignite the band's TNT all too real. No turning back at that point. So depending on which rendition of the album you have, Listen to My Heart could actually be the first time you hear this wail as the intro to a specific song. And it plays perfectly with this track's energy. The song tugs at Joey's insecurities with dating and women, as even the title is a bit of a contradiction. A lot of the time, listening to your heart impulsively without thinking can be dangerous, especially when romantic feelings are afoot. And this song seems to be wrestling with that problem. That girl could still be mine, Joey says. But I'm tired of the hurt, and I'm tired of trying. His heart and brain are getting pulled into two different directions. This is a terrific love song that really touches on a pretty understandable dynamic, honestly. And it reminds me of a similar conflicting feelings that David Lee Roth expresses on one of Van Halen's songs, titled So This Is Love. Now we're getting in a taxi cab, and we're driving over to 53rd and 3rd. Now, gonna be honest, the most horrific and depressing song on the album. Dee Dee penned the lyrics, supposedly from his real-life experience, as allegedly he participated in prostitution to support his heroin habit. 53rd and 3rd in Manhattan was well known in the 70s as an area to find that service, and it was heavily frequented by male prostitutes. This song shows off some of the violent, self-loathing elements that would occasionally be found in Ramones songs. And the dark track has some even black humor to it. The lyrics lament not ever being picked up. That must be a strange feeling as a prostitute, getting ignored. Talk about some cognitive dissonance. This is one of the heaviest, darkest efforts, not only on this album, but in the band's entire discography. Especially it gets really eerie when Dee Dee starts singing about taking out his razor blade, as during the song he mentions he kills a man, the cops pursue him, but in his mind, at least he proved he is not a sissy. His vocal tone adds to the haunting subject matter coursing through this song. So Dee Dee's voice was not just a part of the Ramones' backing harmonies. He can be heard singing lines, some would argue to varying degrees of effectiveness, throughout the Ramones' career. A terrific example, I think, is when he pitches in on Pleasant Dreams' All's Quiet on the Eastern Front. The music and melody of 53rd and 3rd are quite catchy, as it plays with that classic music dichotomy, performing an upbeat hook over sad subjects. It's one of the songs that really jumped out to me when I first heard this album, but knowing the backstory makes this track even more compelling. Now, swing over to Let's Dance, the first Ramones cover song on any album. Good piece of trivia, as it is important to mention that these guys were the kings of this field. Throughout their career, the Ramones would excel at putting their unique stamp on cover songs, be it Rocket to Rush's take on the Trashmen Surfin' Bird, or taking on the incredible Bob Dylan's work covering My Back Pages on Acid Eaters. The guys were masters at taking a song already created and molding it in with their own vision. So this song was taken from Chris Montez's 1962 effort, written by Jim Lee. The Ramones definitely added more grime and grit to this performance, as Tommy's impeccable timing drives the different feelings that this rendition radiates. And of course, Joey sprinkled his unique flavor on the vocals all throughout the performance. Now, I will say he is certainly not as easy to decipher as Montez's original take, but the drop-in after Yes, I Know That Tonight's the Night is one of the most electrifying parts of this entire album. This song also gives some interesting insight to the Ramones' potency during live shows, as that would be ultimately their enduring quality as a band, the one that made them the most famous. The Ramones had to embark on incredibly long, grueling tours, as their records were not massive commercial successes. So, their live shows, especially early in their careers, became the stuff of legend. And on Let's Dance, the guys were smart and increased their speed and intensity when they were performing this song in front of an audience. It is a terrific idea for them, and it's really a nice pull from live recordings. I always go back to, if you want to hear a good rendition of it, their 1979 It's Alive album. Any song pretty much on that record is incredible. But the live drop-ins after sets up are just obliterated in the best punk way possible. Live drop-ins to the setups, just pristine in the absolute best punk way possible. Moving over to I Don't Want to Walk Around With You. The energy is cranked up even higher on this number, as Johnny's hard, fervent tone is the bedrock of this Ramones track. Really, that was his bread and butter as a guitar player, as his sound is incredibly complemented in these more snotty, brash Ramones songs. Joey asks a good question all young lovers should take note of. If I don't want to be with you, why would you still pursue me? Good question. The ooze adds a critical layer to this number, as they provide a touch of softness to this pretty biting snakeskin tune. The Ramones were terrific at adding those lighter sounds and backing harmonies. And that is where listeners can easily detect the obvious Beach Boys influence. Another time with a slightly more deliberate pace really helps this number, as the musical and vocal elements can really be appreciated all as individual efforts. As the song's tempo would often be increased again for live performances, makes sense, and that change could be argued as a better fit for the song, and I'd be very curious hearing about people's opinions who were either longtime Ramones fans or just music fans in general. If both song renditions were played in front of them, would they prefer a more sped up version of I Don't Want to Walk Around With You, or would they be more entranced by the slowed down album rendition? I'd be curious. Now, Today Your Love, Tomorrow the World closes out the Ramones' debut effort. And it is one of the most contentious songs in the band's catalog, as the song contains tongue-in-cheek lyrics that reference identifying as a Nazi. So, Seymour Stein, president of Sire Records, begged them to alter some of the lines. The Ramones partially acquiesced. Well, I'm a shock trooper in a stupor, yes I am, became the opening line. Originally, more blunt lyrics claiming to be a Nazi kickstarted this effort. But the album's closer still includes some of the lines originally that were touching on this subject. So, more details of this storyline can be found in the 2003 Ramones documentary titled End of the Century, The Story of the Ramones. Great watch. Really, really recommended if you can find it. I've watched it on YouTube a few times. So the initial uncensored lyrics have subsequently been included on special releases of the album. To understand this song, you need to understand this band. Multiple members of the original Ramones lineup had connections to Germany. Dee Dee lived in Berlin as part of his childhood, and he claimed to be, quote, fascinated, end quote, by Nazi paraphernalia. He wrote this song in response to being bullied as a kid, almost like a sarcastic, biting comeback. Tommy also had a connection to Germany. He was born in Hungary in 1949. His parents were Jewish photographers. His mother and father survived the Holocaust by being sheltered by friends. Unfortunately, some of his family members did not live through the vile event. And not to mention also, Joey was Jewish as well. Themes of Germany would pop up throughout the Ramones' lyrics. They saw it as an interesting songwriting topic, especially with half the original members being Jewish. It is a jarring listen, especially the first time you hear this track. But it's interesting they chose a much less offensive title for this song, as Today Your Love, Tomorrow the World does, however, have connections to this world as well, as that title was inspired from a 1944 film called Tomorrow the World, which is the story of a young member of Hitler Youth. So while the guys did change some of the lyrics for the album when it was initially released, the Ramones would play the original uncensored lyrics live. There is even one performance on YouTube from 1978 where they belt out Today Your Love, Tomorrow the World in a German club. That's pretty punk rock. It should be made abundantly clear. The Ramones did not support the Nazi Party. This song is a sarcastic commentary that showed their alternative nature, as well as their dark humor, especially in relation to World War II Germany. Off to the categories. Crank it up to 11. Ultimately, best portion on the album. What They Want, I Don't Know. They're all revved up and ready to go from Blitzkrieg Bop takes home this category. This segment just perfectly encapsulates the Ramones. The band's fervent vitality is on full display throughout this track, but especially this portion. This segment is timeless and still does an amazing job of popping up with their connections to historic events and 70s New York. For eternity, youths who are not yet privy to World War II German military tactics can still identify with this bit. The hey, ho, let's go portion will never leave athletic fields. But this sentiment is the one that defines the Ramones' forever young and ambitious qualities. It is surreal that the band was able to create such a definitive song so early on and make sure anyone, for the rest of time, whoever wants to take in their musical odyssey from the starting line, is first formally introduced to the Blitzkrieg Bop. Reshuffling history. Album's layout. Could there have been any improvements made by the record's order of songs? So, again, as I just mentioned, it's harder to be better than Blitzkrieg Bop as a leadoff. That checks that box. Ending on Today Your Love, Tomorrow the World, certainly interesting as well. The track almost ends like a little bit of a tease for what's to come from the Ramones. So I could definitely see reshuffling the middle portion, as admittedly, it can get a bit repetitive, especially if you're not a huge fan of the band. With so many of their classics, I do or don't wanna songs back to back to back. But ultimately, since the music, lyrics, and song structures are just so similar anyhow, most listeners would probably not even notice a change in tenor from any shuffling of a combination of the songs. As ultimately, the quick messaging packed into a less than 30-minute listening length is more important than the album's specific order. Reprogramming history. What songs have held up the best throughout time and were huge in real time? Blitzkrieg Bop again, rocking through with this one as well. It's never going to go away. One of the top 100 or so rock songs, and I'm certain it will be played for as long as music is literally listened to in our society. People who will never learn who the Ramones are will still hear this song at least once in their lives. So Beat on the Brat was used during the dodgeball scene in Billy Madison, as I mentioned, so that's really helped that track kind of bleed over through generations. A couple of massive connections ensure that the record, not necessarily individual songs, however, really are not going to be forgotten to history. The iconic album cover, and being one of the first true, straightforward, digestible punk records, helps the Ramones live on. Their debut and Blitzkrieg Bop will not easily fade away into obscurity. It would be nice if some of their other songs, a little bit more outside of the insular Ramones community, got some better pub, like Judy is a Punk or I Want to Sniff Some Glue. Ultimately, though, the band's story and debut record will always be there for anyone ever interested in learning more about punk and alternative rock trailblazers. The Pulling Teeth Award, given to a track that's underrated, underappreciated, and maybe even forgotten. Listen to My Heart is taken home this winter tonight. It contains so many classic Ramones qualities. Wrestling with romantic feelings, a one-of-a-kind vocal performance, buzzsaw musical play, and a track that can effectively be performed even faster when they're out in front of the stage. It gets kind of lost a little bit in the shuffle of this record as it's in between Havana Affair and 53rd and 3rd, two of the slightly more well-known songs off this record. But this track gives a lot of insight into who the Ramones were and what they were all about. And ultimately, it's just a great listen on the second half of this album. This Ain't Havana Award, song that blew you away the most recent or first time you heard the album. Let's Dance is the winner for this one for me, as I remember quite a few years ago, really diving into the first few Ramones records with great interest, as I was trying to pick out which songs truly struck a chord with me. And on this record, Let's Dance thoroughly grabbed my attention. I love the drum beat, the unique vocals, the terrific peaks and valleys the music rolled through, all intertwined makes it so incredible. It made sense when I learned that this was a cover song, especially when I started to really get a grasp on just how effective the guys were at performing and recording other people's work. I really enjoyed the song's vibe throughout. Next up, the Highway to Hell Award, Best Musical Intro on the Album. I'm rocking with Judy is a Punk, as that has such a vivacious intro. And I think it's the most classic Johnny Ramone guitar effort taken from their first album. As it is clear, he much preferred when the band cranked up the heat a little bit. And that type of rabid play really would hugely influence me gravitating towards this band as a young kid. And like most of their songs, it is not long until Joey hops into the sequence. but the sheer emotion pouring out of the three instruments is palpable. And with really being able to marinate with their catalog and this album in preparation for recording this podcast, the sonic boom of an intro only kept hitting me harder each time. The Lithium Award, best opening line on the record, goes to Loudmouth, as he starts off with this crack of, "Well, you're a loudmouth, baby. You better shut it up." That's just a hell of a way to start a song. There's no doubt some sarcasm is dripping in the delivery, but volatility will always be an important dynamic in the Ramones' story. Fighting, be it for fame, success, or even with each other, is a key aspect of the band's DNA. Many song openers are often simple yet gripping from the guys, and Loudmouth is no exception. The Eruption Award, Best Musical Extended Piece. Now I Want to Sniff Some Glue has an incredible musical break inside of it. It's very unique for this record. So obviously, the band is notorious for shunning drawn-out instrumental solos. That was partially a huge point of why they're still remembered to today. And basically, that was their antithesis as a group. So this category was a bit limited in my search. But on this track, despite the shortness and length, the song does include a portion with Joey's voice taking a breather. Dee Dee's bass, Johnny's guitar are just so thick and powerful on this number. And Tommy's rhythm, acting as the build-up for the vocals returning, is one of the most phenomenal sequences on this album. It's a terrific job by the three guys briefly showing their musical chemistry, with Joey taken out for just a moment. Tattoo or t-shirt. What's something from this album that would make a cool shirt? Or even tattoo if you're really into them. It's kind of a cliche, but I can't go against it. The album cover wins. Well, there are quite a few amazing Ramones t-shirts already out there, including that famous insignia with the eagle holding the bat. It is a challenge to go harder than the original photo. Whether you're going with the letters or just the iconic pic, the image is incredible as a t-shirt or as art decor. One of the first things I hung up in my apartment was that old photo inside of an ad for the Ramones. Nobody's perfect. Just going through and saying which part of the song on this record is maybe not the best, that I flat out don't like. There's not one that I found that I flat out just never want to hear again. I'm going to take some time here on this segment here, not to really criticize a song, but more of to add context to one. As Today Your Love, Tomorrow the World is not a bad song at all, and it's a fitting closer for the album. It's just a bit hard to explain to someone why there is no need to be alarmed from the lyrics. In the drug-fueled 1970s, some musicians were using connections to World War II Germany as a way to either push anti-establishment stances or express themselves with no restrictions. David Bowie's blistering comments in a 1976 Playboy interview, Mick Jones being in a band named the London SS before the Clash, Sid Vicious of the Sex Pistols donning a swastika t-shirt. Joey and Tommy were both Jewish, so they clearly did not identify with the despicable worldview of Nazi Germany. But this song was the Ramones going for a dark, twisted joke, having a Jewish singer vocalize such outlandish lyrics. It is a complicated part of the Ramones story, and some people will be too shocked or upset to ever fully take in the context needed. Off to Almost Famous, and this is the portion of each podcast episode that I do, basically arguing why modern music fans should care about this band and record today. And this is titled The Punk Rock Playbook. One of the most fascinating conversation topics in the music stratosphere is the idea of genres and the subsectors inside said genres, causing quite the stir. People get really fired up about this idea. Who really started heavy metal? Led Zeppelin or Black Sabbath? Is it possible to enjoy Johnny Cash and Luke Bryan equally as country musicians? And what the hell box does David Bowie fit into? Genre debates and the often heated arguments that followed run rampant throughout music history. And the discourse has only heightened in the internet and social media age. People are sprouting off their opinions on these matters with the same tenor is a war room. And no genre is more wildly preened over with a sharp-toothed comb than punk. It is ironic that the rock form first designed to be for everyone with no predispositioned formula now comes attached with a detailed do's and don'ts list. Hairstyle and color, pant material and cut, your political leanings, how you view the world, what record label are you on, how you distribute your music, how you listen to your music, which artists outside of the sphere do you enjoy, your thoughts on guitar solos, how you feel women should be represented in rock, how you stand on stage, and how you even participate in the audience, all have very rigid confinements inside this universe. For a genre that prides itself on not abiding by cultural conduct, there are quite a few guidelines in the punk rock handbook. Now, the average person, or even music fan, could not give less of a rip about these distinctions, much less truly recognize the cultural differences between classic rock bands and punk rock bands. However, even those woefully ignorant on the topic of rock music probably know a thing or two about the punk aesthetic. They must be familiar that ripped skinny jeans, leather jackets, and short, fast-paced songs orbit planet punk. And we have the Ramones to thank for that. Starting with their 1976 debut album, the Ramones took punk ideals birthed by Iggy Pop, the MC5, and many others, and wrapped them together in a digestible form of art. Many punk prototypes, such as refusing to exist inside societal norms, choosing to keep tattered clothes in your wardrobe, and using aggressive music as a vehicle to express yourself, can easily be detected on their first record. The Ramones' attitude and style were as important in cultivating this form of rock as the fact they only needed 2 minutes for each song to accomplish their musical goal. That is evidenced by the point their album cover can be recognized as stylized punk by those who could not name any song in the Ramones' discography. They created the punk rock uniform, and for the next few decades, some would partake in this style as a Halloween costume, a fashion fad, or as a part of one's self-identity. But whatever your relationship is with this particular look, it would have no meaning in your life whatsoever without Johnny, Tommy, Joey, and Dee Dee leaning up against that dilapidated wall and posing for that photo session. And then it was developing that sound of theirs. Quick, to the point, and no unnecessary flash. Again, 1976 was prime time for Kashmir and Freebird. Not only are complex, elongated musical sequences not everyone's cup of tea, they also are not a realistic end goal for the average kid storming a Gibson in his garage. One vital aspect of the Ramones' legacy is they showed a never-ending plethora of young musicians. They did not need to look like models or craft masterful relationships with their instruments to be rockers. Kids are always going to want to strive to be Led Zeppelin. And hey, dreaming is free. But to obtain that level of extraordinary talent that Jimmy Page possesses, while expressing the same je ne sais quoi as Robert Plant, is unrealistic for almost anyone who has ever strapped a guitar across their chest. Most professional musicians, even successful artists in the rock genre, can't be that. But the Ramones showed the world you could accomplish a lot with 3 chords and an attitude. And that goes for listeners as well, those not interested in going down the performance route, who just want to sit back and take in some tunes. Some rock music can be intimidating. A wall of intricate play and complex subject matters intertwined with orchestral production on par with a Broadway play? Some of us really enjoy mumbling along with a guy raving about wanting to sniff some glue. The Ramones wrote the initial doctrine of what most informed music scholars would acknowledge as punk music. But they also accomplished more than that with their first record. They showed countless of self-proclaimed oddballs, rejects, freaks, and outcasts that they were also invited to rock's party. Not only was their music brash and straightforward, their attitudes and subject matter echo as an eternal call to arms for all those who are proud of the fact they have at least one screw loose. The Ramones were helping shape alternative rock well before it became a radio station identity or cliched music industry term. As it would take a while for America to truly embrace these unique perspectives found within a band or audience. And unfortunately, the culture seemed to finally appreciate these ideals in a mainstream rock act when the Ramones were about to retire. The disconnect between how the Ramones were treated during their career and how they are viewed in historical context is certainly melancholic. Not hitting it big with record sales, needing to constantly tour to support themselves, being understood in England, South America, Japan, seemingly everywhere except their home country, and not getting their deserved recognition until after the band called it quits in 1996, after 2,263 concerts, will always be a frustrating aspect of their legacy. But in the 21st century, the Ramones are highly regarded as one of the most important American bands in the nation's history. The pioneers who stayed true to their vision and their form of success, which was ultimately kicking ass on stage. That was especially true early on, as the Ramones had to worry about putting on a good show while dodging debris hurled their way. They carved out a rugged, concrete path that others would eventually coat with diamond records. And many successful rock bands would sing their praises to the nth degree in perpetuity. In 2002, when the Ramones were welcomed into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, in their first year of eligibility, Eddie Vedder inducted them with a terrific speech, and Green Day ripped through 3 of their iconic tunes, including a scintillating rendition of their lead-off gem, Blitzkrieg Bob. When the Ramones put out their debut album in April of 1976, they had no idea a truckload of frustration was on the horizon. That in just a few years, the band would become cynical, jaded, and worn down by an industry and a nation that would not get them until they hung up their leather jackets. But in America's bicentennial, they were actually excited, especially Johnny, who was convinced they were about to break through with a hit single. And those emotions still radiate through this album all these decades later. As is the case for many artists, the Ramones were not fully appreciated in real time. True innovators rarely are. The Ramones' debut album lives on as Genesis 1 in the punk Bible. The foursome songs, style, and story will always resonate for those who march to the beat of their own snare drum. Joey, Johnny, Dee Dee, and Tommy may all be gone, but their contributions to rock and roll will survive as long as power chords can be downstroked and leather jackets can be paired with faded jeans. And their everlasting impact on music began with their initial studio album, Punk Rock's Blueprint. So that does it for this episode. Don't scratch the vinyl. So just a few housekeeping items before I sign off. Please follow the show on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube at DSTVPod. Facebook page is Don't Scratch the Vinyl Podcast. I'll be adding additional clips and content to those channels as long as I'm producing the show. There's a lot of good stuff up there right now. Next time, I'll be discussing AC/DC's first international album, which is titled High Voltage. They were one of the first rock bands that I truly fell in love with, so I cannot wait to discuss them on this show. That episode will be recorded sometime in the next couple of weeks, which will be around the 50th anniversary celebration of that album, which is going to take place in May of 2026. Thanks again for listening. I really appreciate it. Hopefully you got something out of this show if you were a longtime fan of the Ramones or did not know much about them before listening. Please share along with friends and family. Every little bit helps as I continue to grow and refine this program. I hope I did their story justice, as they are a key band in the history of punk, rock, alternative music, and obviously mean a lot to me personally. So, thanks again for hanging out and listening to me ramble about one of the best bands America has ever produced, and one of my personal favorites. And remember this, please, above all else, if you take one thing from this show, remember, you rock, and don't let anyone ever tell you different.